Good afternoon. Welcome to North Point of View. Here with Dr. Walter Kemmsies. Walter.
Hi there. Hey, how are you?
I'm good, man. How's it going?
It's great. I just want to make sure my unofficial sponsors are covered in our call today. It's a fine Georgia company.
There you go, man. Shout out. So today, I'm going to do it. We're going East Coast versus West Coast. But we're talking about market share of container volume. So it's sort of like a different conversation, but it's real and it's happening. We had a flashpoint this week. The September numbers came out, and I incorrectly stated New York beat LA and Long Beach for the first time ever, but just literally in the last 30 years, right? So give us some historic context.
Right. So up until 1990, the Port of New York handled more containers than the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, both combined and separate, individually.
That's insane to think about based on the numbers currently.
Exactly. Because see, in 1980, we passed the Staggers Act, which deregulated trucking and railroads. And for the first time, those industries, in at least 50 years, maybe longer, they were able to structure new services, make new offerings to the market. Because prior to that, they had to deal with the Interstate, Commission, and everything they did. The rates were regulated, the service offering was regulated, and basically you were trying to walk on a tightrope with your hands and feet tied together.
And by the way, students, that Staggers Act of 1980 will be on the final exam, right?
Exactly.
That's a big one, right?
Exactly.
If you don't know that one, you failed the class.
Exactly. You're retired. If you know it, you're retired. If you don't know it, you're not retired. So basically, up until 1990, the Port of New York was bringing boxes in from Asia, and a lot of those containers were trucked or railed back to the West Coast. And suddenly, the industry got this great idea. Why don't we have the West Coast stuff come into the West Coast? And then they had a second, even brighter idea is, why don't we bring the East Coast stuff to the West Coast as well? We'll leave the West Coast stuff on the West Coast and we'll rail it over to Chicago, where the railroad system in the US and North America, as a matter of fact, gets together. That's where East meets West. Chicago actually sees and has always seen more containers than any individual port in this country.
Right.
And that's just simply because of the intermodal shift of containers from east to west.
Trading center of the country.
Exactly.
So now, prior to, now, in the meantime, but now East Coast is taking market share, has been taking market share from the West Coast.
Right.
For the last half dozen years.
Easily.
But now it's exceeding, and obviously the big thing is cost, right? We talked about that for years. It's cost, right?
That's right. So my friends at Descartes, it's a nice logistics company. They have a lot of technology embedded in their system. They also publish container data through the company called Data Mine. And my friends there have been jumping on this particular trend for quite some time. They've been observing that.
Right.
That shift from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Yeah.
And they were the ones who flagged to me, or at least I get an email from them, a newsletter. And my friend Chris Jones flagged that New York had more than LA and Long Beach in the month of September.
Yeah, huge. And so a lot of reasons, right?
But not collectively, right? I mean,
right.
if you add them up, they're still,
Right. But it's sort of a watershed moment because with one single stat, you see the market share coming back to the East Coast. Mm-hmm. You've had a couple of major events, right? The expansion of the Panama Canal, the size of the boats, the ships coming through, the amount of volume, the cost of doing business on the West Coast, right?
Yeah.
The restrictions, environmental issues, the congestion. I mean, congestion's got to be, the cost, the amount of time that a trucker sits waiting to get to the port, hopefully picks up a box and comes out of there, puts tremendous strain and adds cost to the system, right?
Right. So about a month or so ago, maybe a little longer, Paul Page, our buddy over at the Wall Street Journal, he cited...
Who's your buddy?
Yeah.
I don't know him, but...
Oh, well, I'll take you to lunch. So he cited Datamine's number, 2.4 million import TEUs per month is the congestion point that Datamine estimated for. If we do more than that through our ports, at least some of our ports are going to be congested. They're not going to be able to move things through very freely. And right now the number is falling off because we're, for the first time in 2 years, past a peak season.
Right.
So, although the year-on-year numbers are negative, like Georgia Port Authority just reported minus 9.8% October this year to October last year, it's a relief. Our ports, our system wasn't designed to handle all of that. The Port of New York had capacity, but up until the pandemic started, but they've been struggling quite a bit too. A lot of truck drivers have to get in line, and sometimes on some days they don't even get into the terminal in that area. So it's been very tough. But the really weird thing is we still have ships waiting to get into the ports of New York, Savannah, Norfolk, Charleston, LA, Long Beach. We still have ships waiting, at sea anchored at sea, waiting to get a berth. And the numbers for September and for October are coming in below where we were a year ago. So how can we still have ships waiting to get into the ports, and yet the year-on-year numbers are lower?
Yeah,
so
not getting it off the dock floor, right? It's not moving.
That's right. Well, that's part of it. I asked our friend Rick Gabrielson, and Rick gave me like 15 reasons for that.
Of course, Rick did.
Yes, he did. But the obvious one is that a year ago, LA, Long Beach had over 100 ships sitting, anchored at sea, waiting to get to a berth. Savannah didn't have that many, but still, we now have fewer ships today than we had a year ago, and those ships are not fully loaded. They're running at 80 to 90% capacity utilization. So in my mind, this is a really good thing, because we need to take a break here and go check out the ship-to-shore cranes. They've been operating at peak demand capacity levels for the last 2 years, since August of 2020.
Yeah, 110%. We hit we've gone inside on the Port of Savannah, that 20% margin has been gone for 2 years, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So everybody needs a good break.
And back to the trend line that you and I have talked about so many times, right?
Right.
You keep telling me, don't look at the dips, look at the trend line.
Yeah. And so what I've told the port industry, I don't know if you know this, but I'm now a partner of the American Association of Port Authorities. We're collecting data from the ports, and we're going to report it, put out a quarterly report. We'll share the data with the ports, of course, but we will be publishing something with the AAPA. And basically, it'll be about exactly that. What's the trend line, and how are you doing relative to the trend? So we'll
I think, obviously, the West Coast, East Coast thing is a conversation that'll continue. One of the big issues now is the focus on, EV and the power supply to fuel the electric vehicles, and the port and the other restrictions may or may not be available on the West Coast.
Yeah. I've seen some pretty stupid stuff in the last 2 years.
Tell me what you really think.
I see the Federal Reserve raising interest rates to solve a supply problem.
Yeah.
That does not compute. I've seen big retail companies that trade on the stock market order in more and more goods as if we were going to stay sheltered indoors for the next 100 years, when nobody wants to stay indoors that much.
Right.
So we've seen that kind of stupidity. And then we see the, even higher level of stupidity about we're all going to shift to electric cars in 2 years because there's a lot of forest fires out there, and we don't have enough water. So we're all going to shift to electric vehicles. Well, you know how much water it takes to make an electric vehicle? A lot.
Yeah.
For the chips, for the batteries, for the car itself.
And we've talked about...
I don't get it, Mark.
We've talked about the ESG mantra and some of the things that some of the corporations are doing, municipalities are doing to try to appease the shareholders or the masses. But in actuality, if you look behind the numbers, they don't add up, right?
They don't. We don't have the ability to generate enough electricity to power the fleet of vehicles that are used in California. We see all of these electric truck companies out there at trucking conventions showing their vehicles. But a friend of mine who works as a senior executive at a trucking company told me they bought 4 electric trucks, and their primary use, because they can't really use them, they run out of power too quickly. So their primary use is for these displays at conferences.
Photo ops.
Exactly. So they're great photo ops.
Wave the green flag, right? As always, Walter, it's a pleasure. Thanks for everything, man.
All right. Good seeing you, Mark.
All
Take
right.
care.
See you.